The Initiative for Global Development. Boy, that sure is something big. And what it is business leaders working to end global poverty. That's an even bigger thing. And the leader of the whole group is Jennifer Potter. And Jennifer's with us right here on Rainmakers. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
Been trying to get you in the interview chair now for years, and we have finally made it. I think it's because you're busy ending global poverty.
Trying to.
So, a lot of people immediately when they hear this, business leaders working to end global poverty, they will think with a cynical mind that that's not true. Is it?
It's not true that business leaders are trying, or it's not true that they can?
Either one, either one.
Well, let me say the Initiative for Global Development started here in Seattle with an illustrious group of community leaders who really believed that the business voice needed to be at the table on issue of global poverty, that all the work that government does, all the work that charitable organizations do is, helping a lot, but what's really going to take global poverty over the line is investment for economic development and growth. So some years ago, Bill Gates Sr., former Governor Dan Evans, Bill Ruckelshaus, the former head of the EPA, Bill Clapp, General Shali Kashvili started the organization with the thought that let's get business at the table talking about these issues, about why it's important for our country's interest, as well as the humanitarian reasons, to do something about global poverty. So it was launched in Seattle, became an independent organization in 2007 with a board of its own, and created a leadership council, which is co-chaired by Colin Powell and Madeleine Albright, and populated by some really high-level political and business leaders.
Business leaders across the United States, across the world, or?
Well, it started, our initial focus was on changing policy and really influencing policy as it relates to poverty and development. So we took strong positions on aid reform, on the creation of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, you know what that is, on trade policy. And about 3 years ago, we added a dimension called the Frontier 100, which brought business leaders together from developing countries with business leaders from developed countries to share information, form partnerships, but particularly to promote investment in developing countries.
We're going to talk an awful lot about the Frontier 100, but I wanted to get back to the Millennium Challenge Corporation because you said that you know what that is. Well, a lot of people probably don't.
Well, the Millennium Challenge Corporation was created under the George Bush administration as a way to create a performance-based foreign aid approach so that countries had to pass a pretty onerous group of hurdles in order to qualify for foreign aid. But when they were qualified, then the U.S. government was willing to make a long-term commitment of a certain amount. So there was certainty, there was predictability, and the country participated very strongly in how the monies were to be spent. So a lot of it has gone for infrastructure. I'm not quite sure how many countries there are now, MCC countries, but they add more every year, although in these difficult budgetary times that may slow down a bit.
Do you find that business leaders themselves are into the trade, not aid, as opposed to so many people here who are saying, American jobs first? I mean, or are they mutually exclusive?
Well, I think they're linked, and I think that we need to care about both. I think clearly we need to care about jobs at home and our own economic situation. But I also think that the businesses that we work with see that 75% of global growth is occurring outside the boundaries of the developed world, in places like India, Africa, Brazil, South America. And that if American businesses want to be in the game and want to be players, they really need to get involved in those investment opportunities. I think that growing middle classes of those countries is in fact helping create demand for our own goods and services, which then in turn becomes part of a virtuous circle where those dollars come back into our own economy and ensure our place in the global order. And I can give you an interesting example of the Cummins company, which makes, among many things, generators, and knew they had an upside in Africa because energy and power is such an issue in Africa. So the CEO of Cummins met with some of our African CEOs. Frontier 100, by the way, initially is in Africa. We plan to expand to other parts of the world as time goes by, but we're trying to perfect our model in Africa. So the head of Cummins met with these African CEOs, brought them to Indiana to his headquarters to meet with his executive team, and as a consequence has revamped his entire Africa strategy. He's going into markets he wouldn't have gone into before because he has trusted, high-integrity African partners on the ground. He's creating technical training opportunities so that Africans can move into management positions. He has opened up new offices for Cummins in several places in Africa, and he's made a commitment of $75 million investment over 5 years to really grow that business.
So in addition to being a policy organization, IGD is a matchmaker?
We are kind of a matchmaker. We are, and we see ourselves as working to be the go-to organization for companies that want to invest in the developing world profitably, but with social impact. So I would say our sweet spot are those companies right now that have an interest in Africa, that are already there, that want to expand their footprint.
Who are some of those companies that people would know, besides Cummins?
John Deere, the head of Microsoft Africa is part of our group.
Well, like on your leadership
Unilever
council.
is,
Unilever too.
And on our leadership council, we have the former CEO of Coca-Cola, Neville Isdell, Bill Green, the chairman of Accenture, Michael Dans from the Brinks Company, Tim Salso from Cummins, among many others.
Business globally has taken a massive hit in the past several years. Some of it self-inflicted. As your leadership council, how are you dealing with that at IGD as you try to form this group, expand this group of business leaders seeking to end global poverty?
Well, I think that business recognizes that the growth opportunities are in the developing parts of the world now. It's the new frontier, those frontier markets. And to the extent that they can operate successfully in those markets, they not only can do extremely well, they can also do good because they will have a poverty reduction effect. And then, as I said, part of the virtuous circle of those dollars flowing back into our own economic system. So I think the business leaders that have vision and patience, you know, it's hard to go into some of these developing markets. The rules are a little bit different, the culture is different. And what we're providing those companies is, let us help you meet people who will help you do business in these markets, in these emerging markets. Let us give you some guidance on what's worked and what hasn't worked. And when these business leaders come together, and by the way, now there are 70 CEOs as part of Frontier 100, 35 of whom are from Africa, representing 17 African countries. And they come together at least twice a year on a major basis to share this kind of information about what's working, what's not, how do you do cross-border, solve cross-border problems, how do you expand, how does a multinational company expand across the continent? So I would say we're trying to get the word out that there's huge opportunity in Africa and change investor perceptions. Those businesses which have the vision, I think, are also getting the word out that there are huge opportunities. And it's really a win-win.
We're very fortunate to be talking with Jennifer Potter, who's the Executive Director, President, and CEO, basically the top person in the Initiative for Global Development, which is a Seattle-based NGO that is is a group of business leaders trying to end global poverty. Please be sure to go to the website for more information, igdleaders.org, and we'll get that up on the screen several times. What are some of the poverty alleviation initiatives that are working?
Well, I think the simplest one is that when business expands and jobs are created, poverty is reduced. I mean, there are lots of ways to slice and dice the issues of poverty. You know, it's a complex constellation of conditions. And as I said before, I think the work of the NGOs is just really tremendous, particularly some of the microcredit organizations, and certainly the work of governments. But it is our underlying conviction that what's really going to move the needle on poverty reduction is economic growth, business expansion, job creation, and getting goods and services to low-income people that they wouldn't have in the past. Is
it this simplistic? It's always seemed to me that if roughly half of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day, that if they were to make $10 a day, that would be a good thing for everybody? Is it that simplistic?
Well, clearly, to the extent that people are making more money and can afford to buy the goods and services that they can't currently afford to buy, that's a very good thing. Africa, as an example, has an enormously fast-growing middle class, and in fact, I think that 7 of the 10 fastest-growing economies in the world in the next 5 years will be in Africa.
Really?
Yes.
So when we talk of Africa, there is Northern Africa, then there's South Africa, there's East and West. So it's not really all one Africa, though, is it?
No, it's an extremely diverse continent of 54 countries. But I think one of our CEOs from the Brinks Company put it very well when he said, there's just been tremendous growth and reform in many of the African countries in terms of, the fiscal policy, the monetary policy, the regulatory environment, the sort of how does that country treat business development. And there are probably 15 to 20 countries that are really ripe for investment. And overall, across Africa, it's predicted that their economies will grow 5.75% compared to our measly, 2% right now. But the biggest economies on the continent will probably grow 10%. So there's enormous opportunity for investment in those areas.
Just American businesses or Western businesses, or are businesses from other parts of the world in it too?
I think it's wide open for business. Our particular interest is getting American businesses more engaged because we know the Chinese are in Africa. They've had an enormous footprint in Africa, and we think that it would be very much an American business interest to get into those markets and to invest. It takes some patience and it takes willingness to change your business model. Cummins being the perfect example of that. But I think if companies are willing to do that, there's a huge upside.
The one thing that I've heard at some of the conferences that I've been at is that in order to deal in any developing country, emerging market, it's relationship based. Whereas here in the United States, many things are transactionally based. Is that correct? Do you have to drink tea first?
No, I think so. I think so. And what we've found with the Frontier 100 convenings is that people begin to trust each other and like each other, and they want to do business together. And they begin to refer each other to their other colleagues. We were sitting at a dinner one night in Dakar, Senegal, and somebody said, well, I really like to go into Angola, but I don't know anybody in Angola. And one of our African CEOs from Zimbabwe said, oh, I know exactly who you should talk to in Angola. And in fact, that company is going into Angola as a result of it. So it's very relational. It's also, we keep the settings pretty intimate so the conversations can go deep. And people know that they're closed sessions. They have the confidence that what they say is not going to go outside the room. They're really there to inform each other, to try to find partnerships, and to really promote investment.
Well, let's talk about the Frontier 100. Let's talk about the specifics of it, where it came from, what it is, what you expect for it to do.
It came out of our sense that our core competence was really on the policy agenda and really trying to influence U.S. policy by bringing a business voice to the table. But after a few years of that, the board said, why don't we create a way for our members to get more directly involved with development? And so we scratched our heads, we hired a consultant and did some thinking about what kind of an opportunity we could create that would really bring value to those companies. And we came up with Frontier 100, the notion being that when the top business leaders get together, 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 20-on-20, that there will be tremendous amount of shared information, shared expertise, mutual learning goes on, and then these partnership opportunities just arise out of those conversations. So we've seen, since we started, which was just 2.5 years ago, there's about $200 million of potential investment capital in the pipeline that wouldn't have been there otherwise, and a firm $75 million, which is the Cummins Company's commitment to Africa over 5 years. So our goal is to continue to increase those investments, particularly in the sectors that impact low income. So here's the chain of logic. The business leaders are selected because they're highly effective business people, both U.S., European, and African. They also have demonstrated a commitment to social value and to caring about the social conditions in their own countries. So you combine those two qualities with investment in the sectors that are most influencing low income: agriculture, infrastructure, financial services, information communication technology. So we're really trying to drive investment in those sectors because we believe that those will have the most direct on the lives of low income people. And we'll measure that by measuring job creation and what happens to those investment dollars, how much of it goes into job creation and the provision of goods and services to low income.
We're going to be right back. We're talking with Jennifer Potter, who is the head of the Initiative for Global Development. Be sure to go to the website, igdleaders.org. This is an NGO that's based in Seattle that is business leaders seeking to alleviate global poverty. As we talk about global poverty, the one thing I'm hearing is investment and job creation and things that seem to be a step above what people think that nonprofits do. I think many people think that nonprofits deal with serious global health issues like PATH here in Seattle. They also deal with food issues, which oftentimes are health related.
Sure.
And the cleaning of water, like Water First, again, another organization based here in Seattle. Is there a relationship between IGD and its business leaders and these issues, global health, water, food?
Well, we don't deal with any of those issues directly, and I think our underlying conviction is that in order to really impact poverty in a significant way, we really need to do it at a scale that's going to make a difference. So our conscious decision was to look to high-level business leaders, look to multinational companies that have a big footprint, on the theory that when they decide to do something about it, about global poverty, that there really will be measurable impact. And not in any way to denigrate the work of these other organizations. They're fabulous organizations. I know them all very, very well. But we've just decided to take a slightly different tack and come at it from the business angle. And I think that makes IGD unique. We're really the only organizations operating at the nexus of business and development in that way.
Sounds like you're talking about the definition of sustainability.
Very much so, very much so.
One thing, though, about yourself, you have led an organization that is a microcredit lending organization, and that specifically is not multinational corporations. That instead is the investor, if you will, at the bottom level who's creating a job for himself or herself and her family, and it comes from the bottom up. Can IGD, multinational corporations, and microcredit coexist?
Oh, I think so. I think we need everything. And I mean, one of the beauties of microcredit is it can be applied so broadly to so many people who need that kind of help. One of our members, African members, is James Mwangi, who started the Equity Bank in Kenya, which now, I think he's got a 65% market share. And he started as a microcredit organization and figured out how to get out to the last mile by going to the townships and using the shopkeepers, who were sort of the ones who kept track of everybody's debits and credits, using them as bankers. And he now has really moved into the vertical integration where people who are getting microcredit loans now can move up the ladder. He's making very significant commercial loans as well, and that can all happen in the context of his equity bank. He's also expanding into Uganda and a couple of other countries, I think South Sudan, where there's a huge need, and he expects his market share in Kenya to rise up to about 80% over time. Wow. It's a very successful model, so it's microcredit plus.
Also, I mean, having been in the financial services sector and then having seen what happened here, is that bank getting ready to be too big to fail? Yeah,
that's a good question. I don't think the borrowers will let it fail. It's their lifeline. No, he's a really remarkable person, and if he ever comes out to Seattle, we should get him on the show.
We'll get him right here on Rainmakers.
He's terrific.
I wanted to ask you about that, though. It was an interesting statement. You said the borrowers won't let it fail. Is there a difference in a bank in Kenya, like Mr. Mwangi's bank, and a bank here in the United States?
Well, I think the Kenyan banks take the kind of risks that the U.S. banks have been taking and use their borrowers' capital to make risky loans. I think they're much more conservative and much more controlled, at least in the case of Equity Bank. Well, but I'm going to be over my head with expertise here very quickly.
But like with microcredit, the payback rate is a phenomenal rate at 98% and even higher in many of them. And whereas here in the United States, the payback rate is much significantly lower.
Yeah.
But getting back to the Frontier 100, is there I think you touched on this, is there a future beyond Africa for?
Oh, I think so, yes. In fact, we have started to recruit Indian CEOs into the group as well. In fact, the head of Tata for Africa has joined Frontier 100.
Aren't they the largest car maker in the world now?
Yes, it's one of the largest companies in India. It's just a huge conglomerate. And there's a long and strong tie between Africa and India. You know, there have been a lot of Indians doing business in Africa. So our thought was to perfect the Africa model and then probably go to India as a next step, because India still has, 25% of their population lives under $1 a day. There's still huge poverty in India and South Asia. So that's one target. So 25%
of India is larger than the United States. Interesting, interesting. The Initiative for Global Development. Do people in the United States need to be afraid of global development?
I think we can take advantage of global development. and use it to maintain our own status in the world. I mean, it's a complicated issue and a complicated question, but I think a short answer is that for the American economy to prosper and grow, we must look outward. I think we need to expand free trade. I think we need to not be afraid of trade. I think we need to get into the markets that are growing and use them to create these middle classes that will then come back and demand our own goods and services.
You talked about Frontier 100. You also have something else at IGD called the Development Partners Network. What is that?
That is a fairly new initiative, and it really grew out of our policy work that we've done now for many years. But we started hearing more and more from companies that there needs to be a place where they can have an ongoing dialogue with the U.S. government about how can companies partner with government effectively. We've probably all heard the stories from numbers of companies that have tried to work with AID and just, tore their hair out. It's a very, very complicated organization to work with. And also there's so many different government agencies doing so many things. There's no one place to come to say, well, I'm a rice producer and I'd like to open a plant in Uganda. Where do I start? So Development Partners was started with 12 companies around the table in October to, one, create a place where we can have that dialogue and where the recommendations of those businesses can be passed through to the right place in government. Two, to focus on two of government's priorities, agriculture, particularly Feed the Future in Africa, and energy. And the Ghana Compact, the Millennium Challenge Corporation second compact is coming around. One of the criticisms of MCC has always been you don't get the business sector in on the front end of these agreements. They always come in after the fact, after all the decisions have been made. So we were working closely with them to bring companies to the table at the beginning of the conversation about what does Ghana need in power, what's the best delivery system for that. Long answer, but it's a new initiative. We're very excited about the level of interest on the part of these companies. We hope to recruit some more, and we hope to move forward with those recommendations within the next few months.
Jennifer Potter, the head of the Initiative for Global Development, is with us. IGDleaders.org is the organization. It is a group of business leaders who are working to end global poverty. What business school did you graduate from?
The School of Life. No, I didn't. My undergraduate degree was in political science, and then I had a degree in urban planning. But I was in business for about 25 years in Seattle.
Yeah, but you also did one of the coolest things ever. You were in the Peace Corps.
I was in the Peace Corps right out of college. Yes, I was.
So how many years?
And in fact, when it became clear to my parents that I was not going to have an engagement ring on my finger by the spring of my senior year, they encouraged me to go in the Peace Corps. But that was right out of school. And I went to Thailand, which was then a very poor country. And it changed the lens through which I saw the world, I think, forever.
What did you learn? I mean, right now, if there were a college senior who were watching this interview right now, would you say Peace Corps is a good thing to do?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to see every American college or high school student spend at least 3 months in a developing country, because you realize how the roulette of birth creates these extraordinary differences in wealth. I mean, and then the chasms become so deep that without any kind of economic opportunity, they just get more and more exaggerated. And I think seeing that up close and personal, that talent is everywhere in the world, but opportunity isn't. And one of the things that I think we can do as a nation is level that playing field by investing and creating a thriving environment for business that can create economic opportunity more broadly.
How does someone go from being in the Peace Corps to leading an organization of multinational CEOs?
Just lucky, I guess. Well, I've always had wonderful leadership on my board. I named the first founders. And we now also have a number of either sitting or former CEOs on our board, and some Seattle luminaries, Sally Jewell, Phyllis Campbell, Mike Phillips, Jerry Grinstein, Bill Ruckelshaus still on the board. So we've been very fortunate to have that kind of leadership. And with that kind of leadership, we've been able to reach out quite broadly to both leaders in the policy arena and leaders in the business community to join our organization. You
were recently named a Woman of Influence. That's pretty cool.
Somebody wrote my husband and said, well, I knew she was influential over you, but I didn't know about the rest of it.
Well, do you think that you are influential? Can you help alleviate global poverty?
I have always believed in leading with my board and my leadership council. And so far, that's been a very successful strategy. And I think that our theory of change, that business investment and economic growth is going to impact global poverty more than any other single thing, I think it really is beginning to resonate more and more. In fact, you are probably aware that the new head of USAID, Raj Shah, is talking about it constantly. And I think this may be the only silver lining in this terrible budget situation that we're in, but I think people are beginning to realize that the wealth and the resources of the private sector need to be brought more to bear on solving some of these global issues.
And there also seems to be a merging of nonprofits and for-profits, almost to the point where there's a singular goal.
I think that's true. I think that what businesses are beginning to realize is, and the nonprofits, is that they're not each other's enemies. They're, in fact, they could be very much each other's friends and have mutual success. And I think that the nonprofit world realizes that without sustainability, that the changes that are made aren't going to last. And sustainability, to me, is really tied up with profitability. So if something can be financially sustainable, and it will be profitable and it will work.
So it's okay to make profit?
I think it's fine to make profit.
And
but the companies that are bringing their social values into their core business strategies, like Coca-Cola, for example, and baking them into the DNA of their company so that CEOs can come and go, but the values are there, I think they are really going to reap the rewards in the global marketplace. They have better employee loyalty, they have great brand identity, and I think they're just going to be ahead of the curve if they do that. And Bill Green from Accenture, another of our Leadership Council members, also talks about the shared value model and very much believes that the companies that do that are going to be far ahead.
We have about 45 seconds left, and a very simple question. 5 years from now, you're looking back, how'd you do?
I think pretty well. I mean, growing from a small idea in Seattle to what's now an international organization with 70 CEOs actively involved in this promotion of investment, I think is an accomplishment. And I'd like to think that the organization continues to thrive and grow. We're on good financial footing, which is wonderful in this economic time. And I think that the concept has legs. I think it's going to work.
Sounds like we're going to have to be going back to igdleaders.org an awful lot, huh? To be seeing what you guys are doing. Jennifer Potter, thank you very much for being with us, and good luck with the Ending Global Poverty Through Business Leadership.
Thank you, Stan.
And there we are. Rainmakers TV was very, very fortunate to have IGD's leader itself, Jennifer Potter, right here with us. And take care. We'll see you next time right here on Rainmakers TV.